When the world goes dark, light yourself ****. The world often changes quietly, without warning, like a slow sunset that suddenly slips into night. For the man who once believed he had it all, darkness didn't fall in one blow. It crept in, inch by inch, until he could no longer remember what light felt like. He had built his life on predictable foundations, steady work, comfortable routines, and relationships he assumed would last forever. Everything felt safe, almost unshakable. But life has a way of reminding even the strongest that nothing is immune to sudden collapse. It began with the loss of the job he had given years of effort to, a place that once made him feel needed and purposeful. In one afternoon, that identity crumbled. What followed was a series of quiet endings, friends who drifted away, opportunities that slipped through his fingers, and a loneliness that settled heavily into the corners of his home. His days blurred together, each one a little quieter, a little heavier. He moved through his routines like a shadow of the person he once was, each step weighed down by a growing emptiness. The nights were the hardest, restless, silent hours where the world felt far away, and his own thoughts echoed like dark, unanswered questions. He felt swallowed by an invisible darkness, not the kind that comes from the absence of sunlight, but the kind that grows from the absence of hope. The world around him continued moving, but he stood still, fading deeper into isolation. He watched others glow with purpose and connection while he dimmed with every passing day. The darkness became so familiar that he stopped trying to remember the light. He simply existed, living in a numb rhythm, believing he had lost everything that once defined him. What he didn't yet realize was that the collapse of his world was also the beginning of a quieter, far more powerful transformation point. One morning, as he sat in the silence that had become his constant companion, he noticed something small, an urge, a whisper of desire, not to run from the day, but to meet it, even minimally. It wasn't a sudden burst of inspiration, nor a surge of strength. It was a faint spark, barely visible but undeniably present. For the first time in a long while, he let himself lean into it, even if it was only for a moment. That almost invisible spark was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. He started by simply acknowledging the darkness rather than fighting it. He allowed himself to feel the weight he had been avoiding, to sit with the discomfort that had been swallowing him whole. In that acceptance, he discovered a quiet truth. The darkness was not an enemy, it was a space for rebuilding. And within that space, even the smallest spark could grow. Each day, he sought out one tiny action that made him feel human again. A slow walk outside, not to escape anything, but to reconnect with a world he had shut out. A few minutes spent organizing a corner of his home, not to fix his life, but to remind himself that movement, any movement, still belonged to him. Sometimes the spark dimmed, overwhelmed by old fears or memories of what he had lost. But he kept returning to the small things, trusting that tiny sparks, when nurtured, eventually grow into flames. As he continued these silent rituals, he noticed subtle changes in the way he inhabited his own life. His breath became deeper, his steps more grounded. He found himself paying attention to things he had long ignored, the warmth of sunlight on his skin, the sound of leaves shifting in the breeze, the quiet reassurance of ordinary details. These moments felt like reminders that light still existed, even if he had forgotten how to see it. He learned that rebuilding wasn't about reclaiming what was lost, but about redefining what it meant to be whole. He began creating routines not out of obligation, but out of care for himself. Each morning, he allowed himself a moment of stillness, grounding his thoughts rather than letting them run wild. He started writing down small gratitude notes, not because his life was suddenly overflowing with joy, but because he needed proof that not everything was dark. Over time, these practices became anchors, silent affirmations that he deserved the same compassion he had always given others. One of the most profound shifts came when he understood that self-love wasn't a grand, glowing emotion. It was a series of quiet decisions, to show up for himself, to forgive himself, to allow himself to grow at his own pace. He stopped comparing his journey to others and instead focused on the quiet, steady glow forming inside him. The man who once felt empty realized he was slowly filling himself from the inside out. The world around him did not magically change. His job didn't return, relationships didn't suddenly repair themselves, and life didn't hand him back what he had lost. But he no longer needed it to. He was no longer waiting for external light to guide him. He was no longer relying on others to define his worth. The spark he had nurtured grew into a flame, small, steady, and entirely his own. As he moved forward, he carried this internal light with him. He approached challenges with a new resilience, knowing that even if everything external dimmed again, he had the strength to illuminate his own path.